Welcome to Encounter Wargaming. I'm Jay, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Warhammer 40,000 Codex Imperialis. Warhammer 40,000 Codex Imperialis. So this is the next installment in our basic rules for Warhammer 40,000 2nd edition. Let's start digging into her. So as usual, the first page is the one we really want to pay attention to, because this is all the credits. So again, Rick Priestley and Andy Chambers, these are the guys who wrote the original rules for, well, at least 2nd edition, Rick Priestley being, in my opinion, the father of Warhammer. We've got, of course, John Blanche as the lead art. There's some of his cool art right there. And we're going to look here at 1993 is our copyright date. So that's when this came out. This one actually came out in the same set as the rulebook that I showed you last time on the Relics of the Dark Age. And yeah, so that was the starter set. It came with that book and this book. So that book being the core rules, and this one being all the fluff and unit entries, the stat lines, and all that kind of stuff for your dudes. So let's dig into her. Awesome. There's that classic picture of the Golden Throne that we're all used to seeing. John Blanche's version of the Golden Throne. And just the immensity of it. There's legions of dudes hanging out. Awesome. Banners upon banners upon banners. Badass. So, table of contents. There you go. So we've got all the fluff. They're explaining to you the galaxy, the Imperium, the High Lords, how all that works. We got Space Marines, we got Imperial Guard, we got the Inquisition. Interesting how they refer to the Arbites as Adepts Astartes. I wonder if that's a typo or if that's what they intended. Astra Telepathica, Adeptus Ministorum, Mechanicus, Assassins, Administratum, Orcs, Eldar, Squats, Chaos, and Tyranids. That is the entire list of races. Of course, Necrons hadn't made it into the game yet. Of course, Tau, because Tau didn't even show up until 3.5. Yeah, anyway, stupid Tau. Moving on. So, we're getting into the fluff. This kind of stuff we're used to. Obviously, they've retconned a few things now with the current edition. And in fact, in 8th edition now, they're actually expanding the fluff, which is great news. But for the most part, the fluff that you're going to get in this book is going to carry you through all the way through all the editions. It never really changed in the course of 20 years. Obviously, they added to it in the sense of introducing new characters and stuff like that, but it didn't change the overall storyline. Because obviously there's been a lot of novels and things written over the years. So here we've got a very basic explanation of the galaxy and how everything works. Obviously these maps got a lot more intense once you got into 3rd and 4th edition. We started to get more specific. This is where this homeworld is, this is where this homeworld is. And it still tells you that a little bit, but it's not quite as well laid out. Just kind of a basic description. Alright, the Imperium. Again, I could go over all this fluff with you guys, but it would make for a really long video. The point of this video is really just to showcase this book and show you guys what was in this book, how the book looks, and just take a little trip down memory road, because for me, this is literally my childhood. Loving it. I love this depiction of the Emperor, too. Like he's just sitting there all menacingly. I've seen other ones where he's just like a collapsed, like dead body looking lifeless and powerless. Whereas this one, he looks like he's literally connected to these machines and controlling them, which is awesome. Thanks, John Blanche. And then here we go. We've got the Imperium and how it's all laid out. Sort of the chain of command, I guess, if you want to look at it that way. Badass. Arbites, Custodes. Adeptus Sororitas over here. sororitas are listed under the Ministorum, whereas the Grey Knights and the Malleus are listed under Inquisition, which is interesting because technically sororitas are Inquisition as well. Again, they've retconned a few things here and there, expanded on things here and there. This isn't the exact beginning of Warhammer 40,000, but it's pretty close to it. And this is when they really started to flesh out the fluff and the gaming system. So obviously we're going to see a lot more stuff in this edition than we did in Rogue Trader. So explaining the High Lords of Terror, there's another awesome depiction of the Golden Throne and just the immensity of it. So before we saw the staircase with all the banners beside it, I imagine this is the same staircase. That is absolutely nuts. These Titan-sized machines just kind of hanging out, constantly maintaining it, just to make sure the Emperor doesn't die. And the Custodes, of course, guarding the entrance. That's just nuts. I love that art. And this cool guy. Alright, Space Marine chapters and their foundings. Once again, 2 and 11 are deleted from Imperial records. Like I say, this fluff sort of carried through many editions. So, again, not a whole lot of reason to get deep into it because it hasn't changed much, at least the physique of a Space Marine. We saw that in more details in later editions. The actual process of implanting all these organs and various genetic enhancements and things that make a Space Marine a Space Marine. And of course here they're going over the specialty Space Marines, Apothecaries, Chaplains, Librarians, and Tech Marines. Got a little snippet on the last page about the Dark Angels. We got a little snippet here about the Blood Angels. Both of which end up getting a book later together, which I'll show you guys in a future video, as well as the Space Wolves. They had their own books separate, so those are the chapters that have always had a separate codex from the normal Space Marine codex. In fact, in 2nd Ed, there wasn't really a Space Marine codex, it was the Ultramarine codex, and everybody used that except for the Blood Angels, Dark Angels, and Space Wolves, respectively. So, there you go, there's the charts that I showed you in the rules there, how it goes Champion, Mighty Hero, and Hero, going up in increments the way it showed you in the basic rule book. So you start with your basic Space Marine, your Sergeant goes up from there, Hero, Mighty Hero. Boom. Actually, I guess a Champion would be more like a Captain, right? Or Lieutenant, or whatever they called it back then. The Sergeant just has +1 attack, and I believe that's the only enhancement. In fact, in here it doesn't even look like they did. If I remember correctly, I don't think they had a heightened weapon skill and ballistic skill. Or initiative. The Sergeants didn't anyway. But we can check that out as we go through later in this book. And I also have a War Gear book and an Army List book to show you guys, so we can check out the stat lines in more details in those books. But right now, we're looking at the stat. There you go. So stats of a Space Marine, that's your basic Mighty Hero. Servitor is basically just a human with a ballistic skill of 4 and a toughness of 4. So that's just an altered stat line. Chaplains, Apothecaries. Okay. I see. So that's your champion level hero. Whereas the the Chaplains can go up even further than that. You have 3 levels of Chaplain, whereas only 1 level of Tech Marine or Apothecary. And Librarians are on that different chart. We saw the Psyker chart in the last book of how they go up in stats, and that's basically what we've got here. We've got 4 levels of Librarians, respectively Mastery Level 1, Mastery Level 2, Mastery Level 3, and Mastery Level 4, which made a difference. Obviously they took those out in later editions, tried to bring them back in 6th and 7th, and now there's no Psychic levels anymore. It's just whether you can cast and deny 1, cast 2, deny 1, cast 2, deny 2. That's how it works nowadays. There you go, Space Marine Scouts. They're literally a Space Marine, except they have toughness of 3, which is interesting, and a ballistic skill of 3, which is interesting. So they're not as good of a shot, and they're not as tough as a Space Marine, which actually makes a whole lot of sense. I think even in the beginning of 4th, maybe 3rd actually, they had lower stats than a Space Marine, and then in 4th/4.5 they made them the same stat line as a Space Marine, just with different equipment. Which is weird because they're initiates, they're not full Space Marines yet, so it's just weird that they have the normal stat line of a Space Marine. It kind of makes sense that they would have less of a stat line, they're not as well trained. But what can you do? So now we're getting into the Imperial Guard, all the cool fluff that goes along with them. Commissars, different regiments and how they work, a little bit of fluff story. I love these little squares that they put in all the books, and they're still doing it today. Love it. Just as you're reading about the sort of encyclopedia type version of it, you can just like take a little break and read about some narrative aspects of the 41st millennium. It's the way Games Workshop has always designed these books, and I love the way they design these books. Look at this Ogren picture. You saw that in the Necromunda books too, so cool. This picture, of course, was in the last book, the rule book. But again, we've got the same increments: champion, hero, mighty hero. Same thing over here, Rough Riders, we got a guardsman, champion, hero, mighty hero, and then the stats of the horse. So clearly has twice the movement of a human, but otherwise basic same stat line as a human, which is kind of strange. Yeah, they are. They're exactly the same as a human, except they have a longer movement, no ballistic skill, and obviously a lower leadership. Halfling snipers. That's interesting. Because if I recall, even in this edition they were called ratlings, so it's interesting they call them halflings in here. But because this edition was a complete redo of Rogue Trader, they included all of the stat lines in the basic rules, the same way they did with 8th edition now, where they just kind of pumped out a bunch of indexes to kind of make everybody happy, and then they're going to flesh them out into codexes. They did the same thing in 3rd, which was a reset from this one, where they gave you all the stats, all the rules in the core rulebook for every army, and then started to develop them in codexes. So I guess they've done the same in this edition, just giving you everything base, and then obviously they changed the name of those to ratlings. We've got Ogrins, these are your ab-human warriors of the Imperial Guard. Excellent. Penal troops, cool, cool. I didn't think those existed back then, but I guess they do, which is wicked cool. Commissars, and now we're getting into the Inquisition. So, to believe it or not, a lot of the fluff around the Inquisition that we know nowadays really got developed with the role-playing game they came out with back in the day, Inquisitor. Another book I have, which I might show you guys, it's actually a really thick book, so it's going to be hard to show you guys on a video, because it would be a stupid long video, but we can take a look at it if you guys want to. Again, shoot me a message, shoot me a comment, tell me if that's what you want to see, because I will make it happen for you guys. But it's the kind of thing that might be a little cumbersome to do unless it's requested, so if you want to see that stuff, let me know. I'm not afraid to show you guys. So, into the Inquisition, we've got Inquisitors, we've got the Ordo Malleus, so that's the Demon Hunters that we're used to. We've got some pictures of some Grey Knights fighting a Genestealer Magus, which is kind of neat. There you go, the Grey Knights. Exterminatus. So obviously they hadn't really expanded the Inquisition at this point. Like I say, it got expanded with later editions. Right now it looks like they're putting the focus on the Ordo Malleus, whereas later down the road we've got the Ordo Hereticus, which includes the Adeptus Sororitas. Right now, if I recall, looking back, they put the Sororitas under the... they put them under the Administratum, which is kind of interesting. Whatever. I mean, they are a militant arm of the Imperium, but they should be a militant arm of the Inquisition. So you got your Grey Knight Terminator fighting off some bloodletters. This one's getting electrified by touching his force weapon, which is pretty neat. Whereas this one's about to stab him in the back. Coolness. We got the Arbites. Yeah, that must have been a misprint in the table of contents, because they are the Adeptus Arbites, not the Adeptus Astartes. The Adeptus Astartes is the Space Marines. So we've got the Arbites, which include judges, which are your character, and then you've got the Arbiters, which again come in 4 levels. Wow, the judges being even higher in stat line than your mighty hero. That is nuts. Cool beans. Alright. Moving on. Adeptus Astra Telepathica. So So we've got Primaris Psychers, we've got Astropaths, we've got primary and secondary ranking Psychers are reserved for the Adeptus Astronomica. So yeah, again, just fluff. It's telling you how they sacrifice them to keep the Emperor alive, keep the light going, to keep the lamp on, basically. The Tainted, those are vigorous checks on black ships. Blah, 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 blah. Far from Earth. Demons, they harbor destructive powers they possess, yet despite these vigorous precautions, the Tainted do get through. In the past, important members of the Imperium High Lords have been Psychers of this kind. Slip past the checks and become important officials without the true nature being discovered. Interesting. Well, some humans are Psychers but don't want anyone to know and hide it. And then later get corrupted by chaos, because chaos corrupts the human soul quite easily. The soul binding ritual, there you go, telling you how they, you know, basically go through all that stuff where they lose their eyes and end up becoming a navigator. Again, showing you your standard stat lines. Same basic human stat line we've seen through all of them in the same levels. I mean, human's a human's human, right? Getting into the Ministorum, there you go, there's your sister, hanging out with the priest. Badass. Preachers, confessors, missionaries, and Adeptus Sororitas. They put them under the Ministorum, which makes sense because that's what they currently are. They are a militant wing of the Adeptus Ministorum, which is your priests and stuff like that, the ecclesiarchy, which has a very different religion from the Space Marines, of course. Grey Knights being, yes, the militant wing of the Ordo Malleus, have a very different religion than the ecclesiarchy, just simply because they are Space Marines, and Space Marines have different rituals. The Adeptus Sororitas, of course, being humans, not Space Marines, and being founded after the Age of Apostasy. Of course, follow the ecclesiarchy as their religion, and so it makes sense that they put them here, although they are considered a wing of the Inquisition as well, the Adeptus Hereticus, or sorry, Ordo Hereticus, Ordo Malleus, Ordo Hereticus, are the two that we've seen in the game so far. And the Ordo Xenos, actually, because the Death Watch have been expanded now in the current edition. So we've got 3 militant arms of the Inquisition. Here they're, I guess, not including them as the Inquisition, they're including them as the Ministorum. That's fine. It's, you know, 6 of one, half dozen of the other. So here we go, we've got your basic Adeptus Sororitas, which again, are just your basic stats right now. They later get their own book in this edition, which fleshes out their army list much, much more. Preachers, confessors, obviously are counted as 2 different things. Nowadays they are the same. As far as I know, there is no real confessors as such. They are just priests. And then we're going to get into the Cult Mechanicus, the Adeptus Mechanicus, awesome, which have rules in this edition. Yet for some reason, they pretty much took them out of the game in 3rd, and I'm not sure why. I think they may have been included in those quick start rules that I told you about, where they included all of the armies in the basic rulebook for 3rd edition, but then they never expanded it like they did the other armies. They gave the Sororitas a whole bunch of stuff. Like I say, they became the Ordo Hereticus. They gave the Grey Knights their own book as well in 3.5. They never expanded the Mechanicus, and they just kind of disappeared into the background until of course 7th edition, or maybe in 6th they came out with the Mechanicus. Yeah, I think it was 6th they came out with the Mechanicus. So we went through, like, you know, whatever it was, 10, 15 years there before we saw the Mechanicus rise again as an actual army in the game, as opposed to just something in the fluff, a fringe army where you had a couple of tech priests in your Imperial Guard army, you had a couple of tech Marines in your Marine army. Now they have a whole model line, which is absolutely amazing. And they did back in this edition even. Because there you go. You got Magos, you got Artisans, Electro Priests, Engineers, Rune Priests, Transmechanics, Lex Mechanics, and Servitors. Awesome. There you go, Mars, the Titan Legions, the Quest for Knowledge. That's a cool Blanchard piece right there. I love how dark and sinister this guy's art was. I wish the Mechanicus still looked that dark and nasty. I mean, don't get me wrong, the model line is wicked cool, and I would totally play a Mechanicus army nowadays if I had the time and money. I got so many other things on the go, though, I can't even be bothered to get started with that. But let's get into some stat lines. So we got Tech Priests, cool. Again, currently your Astra Militarum. Tech Priest Engineers. Which is interesting. They call them Engine Seers now. I guess they can't copyright the word engineer, whereas an Engine Seer kind of gives you that sort of like they're a seer, like they can see into the future. That gives you that mystical aspect, but they're also engineers at the same time, building machines. So Engine Seers, I think that's kind of cool. But back here, they call them engineers. We have Electro Priests. Clearly frenzied combat units, because they actually have the frenzy psychology rule. If they run, they don't run, they just collapse from physical exhaustion. That's interesting. Servitors, of course, being immune to psychology, because they are mindless robots, just meant for serving the rest. Very interesting. Now we're getting to Assassins. So I pointed out in the last rulebook that we saw for this edition, there was just a generic Imperial Assassin. This is basically what we're looking at here. So we've just got Assassins, and here's all the rules that apply to all Assassins. It's just one basic stat line. Boom. There's not really houses or anything like that, but I might be wrong on that. Yep, no, I was right. It's just an Assassin. But then later on down the road in this edition, they give them their own codex. And of course, they continued to have their own little add-on codex through editions after that, 3rd, 4th, so on and so forth. Now they are included in your index as... I'm not even entirely sure if they're in the new Astra Militarum book. They may be, they may not be. Either way, they're included in the Administratum section of your current index for 8th edition. Yeah, and that's that. So, we've got the Administratum. Masters of the Administratum, the Adeptus, Perfectus, Masters, Ordinates, and Scribes. So this is basically how the Imperium works. Menials, Subordinates, Curators, and Ciphers. Interesting. That's a cool, goofy little piece of art. The Orcs! Yeah! So finally we're into some Xenos races, and of course the Xenos races are pretty scarce in this edition. Not scarce, but we really only have the 3, because they haven't expanded them much. Of course we had Harlequins and things like that in the last edition, but basically Eldar were Eldar were Eldar. Orcs is Orcs is Orcs. And of course in Rogue Trader we had Gene Stealer cults and stuff like that, as well as extra Tyranid stuff. But they are considered the same faction in this edition as well. You could have a fully Gene Stealer cult army on its own if you wanted to, but I don't see why you would when you have so many awesome selections of Tyranid stuff. And that's kind of the way it works nowadays. Because of the keyword situation, you can have Tyranids and Gene Stealer cults in the same detachment, or you can have them as separate detachments. Whatever, 'tis what it is. Let's get back to the Orcs in this edition. So we've got an explanation of all the clans, which is cool. And there's all our clans, our 6-man clans that we're used to seeing for the Orcs. And Death Skills, Blood Axe. Yep, these are the standard clans that we've always had. The only thing that we've really seen expanded upon this is the Freebooters, which were a special unit entry in this edition. In the current way things are, they are kind of a clan in the sense that they are orcs from many other clans that have just chosen the pirate's life, as opposed to rolling with their clan. So we've got your orcs, and same thing, we're going up hero, mighty hero, etc. Champion hero and mighty hero. Gretchen don't get that because they're just grots. Snotlings, strength 1 and toughness 1. Wow. Wow, and Gretchen had a strength 3 and toughness 3 back then. Now they're 2s across the board, which makes total sense, but Snotlings just don't even exist except for in the fluff. I guess they're just so insignificant, they're not even worth making a stat line for. Runt herds, these little squeaky hounds and stuff. Cool. So you need your run herds for your snotling herds or your Gretchen. Of course, the shock attack gun. Back then, you actually needed to have herds of snotlings around him, because in order to fire it, you had to use up a herd of snotlings, which you purchased as a swarm, much like a ripper swarm or anything like that, or a scarab swarm. They were a swarm of snotlings on a base. Pain boys, mech boys, or mechaniacs, as they called them. Weird boys. I love that piece of art. I've seen it 1,000 times in the past, and it still makes me laugh every time. I'm just going to zoom in a bit for you guys on that. How cool is that, eh? That is so wacky and crazy. John Blanche, thanks, buddy. It almost looks like something out of Nickelodeon or something, you know? Alright, moving on. Now, actually, before we do, I should mention, the Weird Boys had to have minders back then. They literally had to have like anywhere from 2 to 4 dudes just hanging out with him to make sure that his head didn't explode and that, he got his psychic powers off properly, which was kind of neat because orc psychers aren't like human psychers. They just completely lose their shit. I mean, human psychers tend to lose their minds too, but orcs aren't really susceptible to demon attacks as much as they are to just exploding from an overabundance of warp energies. At least in the fluff back here, I don't know if they've carried it through to the new edition, but at least in the fluff in this edition, it like gathers in their stomach, like I guess like nausea or whatever, and then it like literally forces them to vomit out warp energy, which is hilarious. And in the process, they completely lose their mental faculties, even though orcs are pretty crazy to start with. The warp energies make them even more crazy, and they literally need dudes to point them in the right direction. Because it's like, oh god, I feel sick, I'm gonna puke, and then they're like, okay, point that way. Like, vomit that way. So yeah, that's what that is. So we have Boar Boys, which is so cool because, like I say, in this edition they still kind of held on to the Warhammer in space kind of idea. Obviously, they differentiated the games quite a bit, and they were the same plastic boars, but with different dudes on them. So in fantasy, you had the dudes with the spears, whereas in this edition, they had chainswords and bolt pistols. They weren't sluggas; they were bolt pistols. The slugga was a 3rd edition thing. Orcs literally had the same weapons as humans. They had plasma guns, they had flamethrowers, they had bolters, bolt pistols, bolt guns, bolt pistols, auto guns, that kind of thing. It wasn't until 3rd that they differentiated and called them shootas, sluggas, scorches, burnas, etc. So we got Storm Boys. Cool, those are your jump infantry. Mad Boys. This is a unit I wish they had kept, which they got rid of, and they were basically just orcs that were completely out of their minds, and they would roll on this table to see which psychology affected them this turn. So they could be stupid, they could be scared, they could be frenzied or hatred, completely immune to psychology, or just absolutely crazy and just go nuts on the enemy, where they obviously get extra characteristics. That's pretty cool. Yeah, it was just a cool little unit. Again, I actually have a bunch of the Mad Boy models kicking around, and I've always wanted to kind of turn them into a unit of orcs, just to use even nowadays, because they are such goofy sculpts. They're all in like weird poses and like standing on one leg and have like stupid expressions on their faces and stuff. They're just so goofy. This is why I chose the orcs back in this edition to get started with. Not only because everybody had the starter set, and that way I just acquired everybody's half of their starter set, which made it very easy to start an army, but I just loved the comedic aspect of orcs. And they're still, to this day, really the only comic relief left in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. Anyways, moving on. There we go, we got some awesome fluff to hold you through. Now we're getting into the Eldar. Cool, so they're explaining to you the craft worlds and how that works. Eldar moons. We got the Eldar avatars, which is neat. Like I explained in Rogue Trader, an avatar was basically just your leader. Now they've actually expanded it to be like an Eldar version of a demon prince kind of idea. You've got the various aspect warriors, so again, different stat lines for all the aspect, but actually they're all pretty much the same, except for the Fire Dragons and Dark Reapers have a lower initiative. Other than that, everybody's pretty much the same. Yeah, the Banshees move faster, but other than that, their stat lines are pretty much all equal across the board. Cool. Guardians, Warlocks, again, Warlock, Warlock Champion, and Warlock Master. Same increments we saw in the core rules. Eldar Scouts, which today are Pathfinders. They call them Pathfinders still? Yeah, I guess so. Farseers. Rangers, sorry, is what the Scouts are called now. They're Rangers or Pathfinders, right? Exarchs, so those are your aspect characters. Here we go, we've got a unit entry for Harlequins. So Harlequins being a unit in the Eldar army, which they brought back again in 5th. They gave them a 3rd edition book where they were their own standalone army, but it was like literally a pamphlet. It had like 3 units in it. And then in 4th they just vanished, and then in 5th they brought them back with their own book and a whole bunch of new models and stuff. Sorry, they brought them back as a unit in the Eldar book, and then in 6th they gave them all the new models that we know and love today. The Squats, a race that I wish they had never taken out of the game because dwarves are awesome cool and dwarves in space are even cooler. The time of isolation, so explaining to you how the Squats came into being. They are literally abhumans, but they differentiated so much from the Imperium that they included them as their own separate army. But they explained them as abhumans that developed on high gravity worlds, which gave them their short stature and their increased toughness. Obviously they developed technologies that humans lost over time, and then of course they worked very close with the Adepts Mechanicus to resurrect a lot of the technologies of the Imperium, the Rhino, the bolt gun, etc. We've got the explanation of their guilds, the Orc Wars, because of course Squats hate orcs and vice versa, just as they did in Warhammer Fantasy. Dwarves and orcs were arch enemies. They had hatred towards orcs. Squats have fought many long and bitter wars against orcs and bear an enduring enmity against the whole greenskin race. Squats hate orcs and Gretchen as described in the psychology section, so they have hatred, and orcs, vice versa, against Squats. So engineers, much like the human engineers, basically the equivalent of Adeptus Mechanicus in the Squat entry. Fixing your vehicles and such. We've got your Ancestor Lords, which are basically your characters, the generals that are leading your armies, and now the real fun stuff, Chaos. That is an epic piece of art, which I have seen through many editions. That is one of the coolest depictions of Berserker I have ever seen, just because he is so second dead looking, but is still a wicked good piece of art to this day. This craziness we see right here was actually the cover of one of the Warhammer Fantasy Chaos books. I'll zoom in a bit on that for you guys. And it's interesting to note that this was a cover on one of the Warhammer Fantasy books, and that thing looks very much like a Titan tank. Like what would currently be known as the Lord of Skulls and stuff, or the equivalent. Whereas this dude is clearly riding a horse, which did exist in this edition. You were allowed to mount dudes on horses. They kind of taken that out of the current editions. Of course, from 3rd ed onwards, I think they really wanted to differentiate between the two games and not just make this Warhammer in space. They really wanted to differentiate the two games and make them two very different things. And lately, even with the destruction of the old world and the inception of this Age of Sigmar thing, they've really made the two games very different. Very similar rules-wise now, but very different fluff-wise. It's no longer Warhammer in space. The old discs. That actually was a model, believe it or not. So there you go, you got demons, demonic special rules, demonic auras, demonic cavalry, demons that fly, bloodthirsters, bloodletters. Again, these are all units they've carried over from Warhammer Fantasy, the fleshhounds, the juggernauts. And then in later editions, of course, the demons kind of got absorbed into the Chaos Space Marine lists until 4.5, I guess, right before 5th, when they gave the demons their own book again. People were just pissed off that they gave them generic, there's just generic lesser demons and greater demons in the Chaos Space Marine book, which kind of miffed everybody. But the original 3.5 book that they gave us included all the variants: Keeper's Secrets, Demoness, Steeds, Fiends. Again, things that still exist nowadays, they just expanded on it with the chariots and stuff like that. Ergo, we've got beasts that... I wish the beasts actually looked like that. I'm not gonna lie, these new plastic beasts that they came out with are super cool, but the faces look so ridiculous. I wish they had these faces. Got Great Unclean Ones, Nurglings, Plague Bearers, and Beasts. Again, basically giving you 4 types of demons for each god. Lords of Change, Flamers, Horrors, and Discs. Which I guess they expanded into Screamers, because in this edition you had discs on their own, and then also you could have your characters ride discs, which was kind of neat. Now we're getting into the Chaos Space Marines. We've got Chaos Space Marines and Champions, your champions being characters. Again, same progression of stat line. We've got Chaos Cultists, which is neat because they sort of got rid of cultists in 3rd edition and then kind of brought them back in 4th, maybe 4.5. They brought them back in like a White Dwarf article, which was interesting. Another thing worth noting is that you could have Beastmen in this edition, which is really interesting because in Rogue Trader you actually had Imperial Beastmen, considered as a group of abhumans, which could be used in your Imperial armies. In this edition, I at least recall with the Chaos Space Marine Codex, once it came out, you actually had 3 separate armies, which could all be used, because of course there were ally rules back then, where you could take like 25% of your army allies. So in the Chaos book, you actually technically had 3 different army list entries. You had your Chaos Space Marine lists, you had your Demon World lists, and then you had your like Chaos Hordes lists, which was your cultists, Beastmen. You could even have things like Chaos Warriors, Chaos Hounds in your 40k army back then, which was really neat. Again, they counted as allies, or you could just simply take your Beastman army from Fantasy and move them over to Warhammer 40,000, throw in a couple of demons and some Chaos Space Marine units, and you probably had a pretty good army, actually. So they've taken that out, again, to differentiate between Warhammer Fantasy and Warhammer 40,000. Now there's no reason you can't currently put Beastmen in your armies and use them as cultists, use them as mutants from, you know, the Renegades and Heretics lists. Not that I would suggest that, because mutants suck nowadays, but anyway, I think they would be better than a human, but they're not, they're worse, so whatever. Now we're getting into the Tyranids. Cool Tyranid fluff, love the old artwork. The old Tyranid warriors I've pointed out to you guys a couple of times in the progression of these videos on 2nd Ed. Sweet. Just explaining how the Tyranids came to our galaxy. Here we go, we've got Gene Stealers, Gene Stealer hybrids, Patriarchs, and Magus. This is basically your Gene Stealer cult units, which again, disappeared in 3rd. I think, again, they may have carried them into the 3rd Ed rulebook. Maybe not, we can take a look at that down the road. But then they never gave them their own book, they never expanded upon it, until now, in 7th edition, they finally brought them back into the game, which was wicked cool. Until that, people were proxying in between, those who were dedicated enough to want their old Gene Stealer cult armies back again. I don't know why they ever took them out, because they were such a cool aspect of the fluff that really shows the personality of the Gene Stealers and how they infiltrate human societies before the Hive shows up. Anyway, sort of getting off topic again. Getting into the actual Tyranid units as opposed to Gene Stealer cult units. We've got your Tyranid warriors. Again, sort of like giant gene stealers was the aesthetic sort of back then, rather than what we see nowadays as kind of like that queen alien face that we get. They basically just looked like giant gene stealers back then. Termagants as well, being mini gene stealers. Again, the elongated sort of cone head, you know what I mean? Egg-shaped head kind of thing. Nowadays they do still kind of have that, but they look a little different. I mean, they've obviously tried to differentiate the line a little bit, make it a little more variance. Current effects, of course, so basically your Tyranid Dreadnought and your Hive Tyrant, which is your big monster that leads your dudes. And that is basically the Codex Imperialis. Let's take a last look at these armies, because I always love looking at the old models. How everything was so brightly colored. Like, look at the Space Wolves. Compared to nowadays, people paint them so grimdark, right? Back then they were so bright. That Space Wolf gray was really like that bluish gray with like just white highlights. And you had the super bright yellow, super bright red, bright green flocked bases. Badass. And then of course we've got Ghazghkull Thraka's warbands. There's that old battle wagon I was talking about. And see, there you go. You've got a shock attack gun and 4 Snotling swarms. Which basically, like I said, you wanted to use that gun in a turn, you literally had to sacrifice a swarm of Snotlings to shoot through the gun to be able to fire it. I remember because I had 2 of them back then. And in fact, I even recall one epic battle where like Abaddon was just a powerhouse in this edition, and I fired the shock attack gun and rolled super high. Like, there was a table you rolled on back then, and literally the description on the table was a Snotling appears inside the unit's chest and eats his way out. So like Abaddon, like one of the most unstoppable characters in the game, which is not so true nowadays, but was then because we're talking about Hero Hammer. Literally a Snotling appeared inside his stomach and ripped him apart from the inside. And my opponent was so pissed. Like literally, that was like 20 years ago, and I still remember that because it was like the most epic thing that ever happened to me in second edition. Anyway, getting off topic. Not really, because we're pretty much done. Let's check out this last battlefield they're showing us here. There you go, you got the old Tyranid Warriors, Gene Stealers, the old Screamer Killer Carnifex, with all these silly sculpts of the Blood Angels. So cool. Again, the old Mohawk Scouts, which are still so wicked cool, but so horribly sculpted. But that was the aesthetic back then. And even look at the Tyranid Swarm here. Like little squiggies, spiders, weirdness. Anyway, that's the Codex Imperialis. Hope you guys enjoyed it. So I hope you guys really enjoyed that look back at 2nd edition of Warhammer 40,000. The book I showed you today and the book I showed you last week were the 2 that came in the Warhammer 40,000 2nd edition starter set, which is wicked awesome. So that's literally where I got into the game, guys. So that to me is like really a blast back to my childhood. It is close to my heart in so many ways. So I absolutely loved doing this. I hope you guys enjoyed it too. And we're going to continue to take a look at the 2nd edition of Warhammer 40,000, hopefully continuing on into the future through 3rd, 4th. Of course, I am using these videos to show off my collection, but I'm hoping also that you guys enjoy seeing this stuff. I don't have everything for all of the editions, but I'm pretty sure I got everything for 2nd edition. So the next bunch of videos you're going to see in the Relics of the Dark Age playlist are going to be 2nd edition. It's just going to be taking a look back at literally my childhood and where Warhammer 40,000 really fleshed out and became Warhammer 40,000. So that being said, please hit the subscribe button below, hit that little bell notification so that you know when our videos come out. Also, if you really like what we do on this channel, you like all our battle reports, our terrain tutorials, our hobby tutorials, our unboxings, our podcast, all that stuff, and you want to help contribute to what we do here, go to the description below and check out our Patreon campaign. For as little as $1, you get all kinds of extra content. You get behind the scenes content, you get these videos, our normal video feed early. You also get a perpetual discount off of thewarpainter.com. We're so happy to be teamed up with this website because it allows you as a patron
to be able to get 10% off all your brushes, brush soap, paints. He's got all the main brands. He's got Scale 75, he's got Vallejo, he's got Broken Toad. Everything you could possibly need delivered right to your front door, and for 10% off just for being a patron of Encounter Wargaming. So please guys, check out the Patreon. There is so much extra there for you. Not just our normal video feed. There is extra stuff that is just for you patrons. So that being said, check it out, help us out, it'll help you out, and we'll see you at our next encounter.
Like a monkey in a rocket on his way back home. Okay.